Moments ago, I spoke with Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, about that and a few other big topics tonight. Good evening, Kellyanne. Good to have you here.
Good evening, Martha.
So what was the reaction and what kind of new legislation or, new moves is the president proposing here?
Well, Martha, as you know, the polls show a vast majority of Americans are against late-term abortions. They're certainly against what Dr. Kermit Gosnell did, which is murdering babies that are already born. I believe that it's Democratic Governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, who really injected this into the public consciousness within the last few months when he said on the radio show that sometimes after the baby is born that you keep the infant comfortable and then you confer with the woman and her physician as to what to do next. So that's post-birth abortion. And it's outraging even people who call themselves pro-choice. They are against late-term abortion. They're against abortion for sex selection purposes. Past 20 weeks, for example, past the point where nonpartisan physicians and scientists say a baby can feel pain. Yeah. And I believe it's President Donald Trump who, on October 19, 2016, in that final debate in Las Vegas against Hillary Clinton, really got this conversation started in earnest, and it brought us to where we are now, the screening of Gosnell in his White House. Why? Because he was asked a question about abortion, and he turned to Hillary Clinton. He said, no, you're the extreme one on abortion. You are. Because you would rip that baby out of its mother's womb an hour before it's born. And I think many people in America collectively went, ooh, and now they're realizing it is done. And it's often done by Planned Parenthood, where they get half a billion dollars a year in taxpayer money and give all their money to Democratic candidates. It's outrageous.
Let's play a moment from last night, because we asked Howard Schultz this question. We asked Bernie Schultz this question as well about, up to the last minute abortion, which he said was not a huge problem and it was political because it's rare. Watch this.
With regard to abortion, do you believe that a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy up until the moment of birth?
Look, I think that happens very, very rarely, and I think this is being made into a political issue.
How big of an issue do you think this is going to be? And again, specifically, what legislative moves does the president want to see? What action are you taking at the White House?
It's a huge issue, Martha, because you heard the crowd there, too. They don't even like when the question is raised because they know it's a losing issue for them. The legislation that the Democrats voted against recently, again and again, is called the Born Alive Abortion Survivor Protections Act. Let's quickly break that down. Born Alive, everybody knows what that means. Abortion Survivor Protection Act, for all the gobbledygook and gibberish that comes out of Capitol Hill that we can't understand what the bill is about. This one's pretty straightforward. You survive an abortion, you're born alive, the government should be protecting you, should be giving just reasonable standard of care that we would give to any infant that's alive or any individual that's alive. The Democrats, including Bernie Sanders, vote against that. So that is unconscionable to many Americans, and we will continue to fight for reasonable restrictions and regulations that are in line with a country that should value life.
I want to get two quick topics in with you here. This is Bernie Sanders last night on the question of how you pay for Medicare for all, which would be essentially free, according to Senator Sanders. Let's watch.
We had so many email questions.
Okay.
Sanders, how he is
fair
going
enough.
to pay.
I got it. So if you're asking me, if your question is a fair question, are people going to pay more in taxes? Yes. But at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of people are going to end up paying less.
All right, so he's going to have to defend his program there. But what is the White House, what is the president going to say on this? Because a lot of people criticize Republicans. They say you don't like ACA, but you really have not come out with something that could have passed, that would fix these problems.
Well, the president, he said earlier this month, Martha, that he wants the Republican Party to be the party of health care. First of all, pre-existing conditions will be protected, non-negotiable, dead stop. But the president doesn't want 180 million Americans who currently have private insurance to lose it as they would under Medicare for all. Also, the president believes that health care in this country should not bankrupt the individual, and it should not bankrupt the country. Bernie Sanders has no idea how to pay for that except to increase taxes, and that means it's not going to be free. This is about free stuff versus freedom. And the president also, just look what he's done successfully by stabilizing. Ironically, he stabilized the Obamacare exchanges through the Associated Health Plans.
He's going to protect pre-existing conditions.
100%.
And that's going to, and also try to bring down the cost of pharmaceuticals and
yes,
health care.
But he doesn't. But Medicare for all means choices for none. Medicare for all versus health care for you. In the president's vision, health care for you shores up, protects, and expands the Medicare that the 60 million seniors and disabled currently rely upon. That would be completely gone.
We're going to be talking about health care a lot, and I think the whole country hopes that both people, thank you, come up with some actual solutions that will make it cheaper in this country. Before I let you go, stories today about people fearing the wrath of President Trump because their names are going to be exposed in this Mueller report when it comes out, in terms of what they told the investigators about what was going on behind the scenes with regard to obstruction. What do you say to that? What's the president's attitude right now? He's been tweeting a lot about this. How is he feeling about this report coming out on Thursday?
Well, we know how we already feel, which is no collusion. That was the central premise in the investigation. And I don't know what's in the report. We'll all see it when everybody else sees it. However, Martha, I would say that's sort of the latest iteration of the palace intrigue stories that the mainstream media tend to love to run around here. It's easier than doing what you and Brett Baer did last night, which is have a town hall about issues, which is ask the tough questions, try to find solutions to America's problem. They'd rather just try to pit us all against each other and the president against current and former and future staff. I can tell you that we're not looking at it that way at all. But in those 400 pages, we know what does not exist, and it's collusion. And let's face it, that was the central premise, that a campaign I ran into a successful finality, that Donald Trump won fairly and squarely, was somehow in a criminal conspiracy with Russians. That's the big lie that was allowed to let fly. We wasted $25 million in 22 months.
As you say, we'll see what it says on Thursday. In 2 words, will the president speak after the report comes out?
I'd expect.
You expect he will. Okay. Those are 2 words. Thank you, Kellyanne. Good to see you tonight. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Well, remember, the Attorney General had the summary of the conclusions of the Mueller report. Then he is said to put out the full report with redactions on Thursday, and that's getting already a lot of reaction before we're even to Thursday. The president tweeting out just these 2 phrases: no collusion, no obstruction. That's what he had to say about it as we lay the groundwork for that release. Let's bring in our panel. David Brody, Chief Political Analyst for the Christian Broadcasting Network. Susan Ferricchio, Chief Congressional Correspondent for the Washington Examiner. And Jeff Mason, White House Correspondent for Reuters. There's been a lot of build-up to this, but Ken Starr and others say we might be let down by what the final product is on Thursday morning.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get to a real juicy part, and then boom, a paragraph of redactions. And I think Ken Starr was exactly right on that. Having said that, I think this is just phase 1. Phase 2 comes in the legal arena, where we find out whether or not that whole unredacted report will indeed get released, which of course will be a whole big legal fight. Look, I think Democrats are going to turn into a bunch of Robert Muellers on Thursday. In other words, they'll be their own special counsel, and they will say, thanks, Robert Mueller, for trying to do your job, but we've got it from here. And they're going to look for every nook and cranny of a redacted report that they can get their hands on and say, we've come to our conclusions. The problem is Donald Trump will sit there and tweet like he did today, no collusion. And, that's the bottom line of all of it.
Yeah, I mean, the investigation, Susan, started with that in mind. Was there any conspiracy between someone on the Trump campaign and the Russians? There was no one indicted for that. And the Mueller report comes to that conclusion that there wasn't that interaction.
As far as we know.
As far as we know. But that's what it's quoted by William Barr, the Attorney General. The obstruction part seems a lot more subjective and seems like where the investigators may have turned their focus more intently.
Right, and there's an expectation that there's a tidbit in there about potential obstruction that Trump may have committed to the course of the investigation. But the original premise was collusion. And according to Barr's summary, which Democrats on Capitol Hill do not trust, that there is no collusion. So what Democrats will do now is the phase 2. They will mine this thing for any impropriety they can find within the administration, within the campaign, anything about Trump, and use it to help fuel their own investigations, which they launched prior to the release of even the summary, when it became evident that collusion was far less likely. So this will be the beginning, basically, for Democrats. It will be fodder for their probes, and I expect that to continue for the rest of his first term.
Yeah, here's Ken Starr again, and obviously he was his own special independent counsel on the obstruction issue.
The counsel to the president testified for 30 hours. This is honestly unheard of. So there was not obstruction, as I see it, given what we know. There was the antithesis obstruction. It was complete cooperation. Lots of nasty language, but cooperation.
He's referencing there McGahn, the former White House counsel, who did give a ton of testimony to this special counsel. And in fact, the White House, with the president's order, Jeff, told everybody to cooperate extensively.
Yeah, indeed. And his point about that, suggesting that there's no obstruction, is interesting. What we don't know, though, is what they said. So we know that they cooperated with the special counsel, but it's very possibly some unflattering stories, some unflattering anecdotes about the president, about other people around him, that will come out in the report if those things are not redacted. The one thing that I think Ken Starr said specifically in the earlier clip that you played, which is spot on, is that we're all going to be a little frustrated.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting is you look at the 2020 candidates on the Democratic side, and they're not talking about this on the trail. I asked Bernie Sanders about it last night. He said, I don't need to talk about it.
Right. I don't think there really, at this point, is any reason to, because it gets into Nancy Pelosi and politics in D.C., and they want to establish themselves as something totally different than that. And quite frankly, the energy with 2020 Dems is obviously on the far left and socialism and a lot of that, what's going on there. And so they're playing to the base at this point. And I'm not quite sure if there's an appetite right now on everything from impeachment to Mueller and this report. I think the Democrats, at least the establishment Democrats in this town, know that they've overplayed their hand, and there's no reason to kind of go down that road. I think it's a very delicate balancing act.
All right, last night I referenced that Bernie Sanders town hall. The tax returns came out literally 25 minutes before we started that town hall. The 2018 tax returns showed a tax rate, a marginal rate, effective rate of 26%, and a 3.4% for charity. I asked the senator about his marginal tax rate. Your marginal tax rate was 26% because of President Trump's tax cuts. So why not say, you know, I'm leading this revolution, I'm not going to take those?
I paid the taxes that I owe.
He's clearly a hypocrite. He could choose to write a check to the U.S. Treasury and pay the pre-Trump tax rates if he thinks that's what they should be now.
What about those exchanges on taxes and specifically Bernie Sanders?
Well, I thought it was a great question, but I don't think anybody, be it Bernie Sanders or anyone else, is going to say, no, I'm not going to take that money and I'm not going to send a check to the IRS. I mean, he could take that money and send it to charity, it sounds like, but he's not going to.
3.4%,
yeah,
exactly.
But he's not going to send it to a government whose policies he doesn't understand, or excuse me, that he doesn't agree with. He is going to say, if I become president, people are going to have to pay more taxes for the policies that I support and that I'm going to implement if I make it into the White House.
One of those, Susan, is Medicare for all, and we spent some time last night talking about that.
Healthcare is not free. You never heard me suggest that we're going to magically...
You just said it was going to be free for everyone.
It's going to be free at the point of when you use it. Does that mean you're not going to pay something? Of course it does. You're going to pay more in taxes.
He doesn't have a plan to pay for Medicare for all yet, but he has introduced options, many of which include broad-based tax increases. The numbers aren't detailed enough to know, but my guess is we're still talking about a $10 trillion hole.
And we tried to get around that numerous times, numerous ways, but it was tough to nail down.
Right, and that's the major problem with some of these proposals, that we just don't know how much it's going to cost, other than it's going to cost a lot. But I think he did an incredibly masterful job at tapping into what the consumers hate most about our current healthcare system, which is lack of portability, high premiums, high deductibles, while steering clear of all the things that would be really difficult to cope with if we were to have Medicare for all, big cost, big tax increases, long wait lines, lack of availability of doctors, getting your health care declined by the government, all these things which, if consumers had more details, might be more skeptical, wouldn't have roared with applause as they did. He was so good at just getting the audience to say, don't you hate the way things are? Let's change it. Yay, everyone was cheering. But again, the devil's in the details.
Well, we should point out there were Republicans and independents and conservative Democrats in that crowd. They were a lot quieter than the Bernie Sanders supporters who were clearly out in force.
Right. Well, look, elections are won at the margins, and so Bernie Sanders was smart to do a Fox News town hall. You're going to win back some of those blue-collar Democrats that went for Donald Trump. Look, this isn't winning the majority of them. Just like, look, in evangelical world, right? I mean, Buttigieg is talking about his faith. He's not going to win white conservative evangelicals. But if he picks off a percentage or two from Trump, that could be game, set, match for Donald Trump.